again. Welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be talking about shame. And shame is something that I've always found very, very interesting because I am someone with very little, obviously, hence why I am here on the internet talking to myself. But I have had people in my life who do have people in my life who seem to sort of operate out of shame and are driven a lot by it. The contrast between myself and them, and then also the fact that I am chronically online, has made me very interested in exploring the subject and thinking about how shame and the online era might intertwine. So let's get into it. Like I was saying, I think it's really interesting the different degrees to which people feel shame, like what it takes for deep character questioning, humiliation to be triggered. And I think shame can be a productive emotion to a certain degree. It allows us to exist cohesively amongst each other, to regulate ourselves, and to hold each other accountable. At its core, I think shame sort of stems from our need to connect to others. It's that which allows us to uphold social norms and gives individuals the emotional responses to be able to do so. But I think the amount of time we all as individuals spent online has sort of maybe altered our relationship to shame over the past, couple of decades. Specifically maybe over the past decade, with how much of our socializing is done online. When I was sort of exploring this topic, I came across, I knew this a little bit already from my studies, but I came across some of the work that Jean-Paul Sartre, sorry about my butchering, French is not one of my languages. He spoke about shame. He's a French philosopher. He wrote that shame fluctuates between us looking at things and us being looked at. So it's like a reflexive emotion. And the interesting thing about it is it's less about how individual actions might be perceived, but more about how our entire character as a whole may be judged or regarded. It isn't about the singular little things that we do, rather than what us doing makes people think about us as a person. In order to sort of maintain social order, there's often a balance of shame. So the norms that we have are upheld through perceptions that we have of both ourselves and of each other. I'm going to give you an example to sort of illustrate this. We walk around in public fully dressed, not because we hate nudity, rather because nudity in a world where being clothed is the social norm would be judged, and a fundamental character flaw in ourselves be revealed to us through the judging eyes of others. Essentially, we wear clothes not necessarily because it's natural or more natural, but because it points us as good and non-deviant members of society. It's almost like a moral thing. And it is shame that makes this decision point to our morality and makes it one that we can hold each other accountable through. I would like to argue that the increasingly sort of digital world that we find ourselves in upheaves this balance where we're holding each other account, it's kind of level. Shame becomes less reciprocal in an online space. It's more one-sided. It's less something that exists to uphold social norms for each other, but instead it's sort of become a means of providing entertainment value. And I think a lot of this stems from the sense of sort of artificial connection that online spaces give us. They also do give us actual connection. However, one-sided connections are a lot more common online. Take the professional influencer. The past decade has created the professional influencer, people with millions and millions of followers who know everything about them. It creates this one-sided parasocial relationship, one that feigns connection but isn't necessarily reciprocal, so can never truly be connection. In this case, we have a people who still crave connection because we are still people in a world where it's becoming harder and harder to find that truly offline. I think that this warping of connection creates a warping of shame, how it operates. So you have a minority of hyper-visible people who share intimate details of their lives, and the many who follow them may believe that they know them better than they know a lot of people in their own lives. The issue comes when these hyper-visible people set a single foot wrong. In this case, the world, their fans, their followers often do come after them, shaming them into sometimes really dire circumstances. Look at the cast members of reality TV programs, how many come out with a myriad of mental health crises at the hands of their brutal audience because they're being judged for how they behaved. They're being shamed for it disproportionately. The way that the internet is designed also means that those driving the shaming, those kind of saying the most heinous statements, can sort of remain for the most part anonymous. They're just part of an anonymous mass. I think it's here that the relationship between shame and shaming becomes super, super warped and unbalanced. We are still the humans that Sartre spoke about. Shame still exists to connect us to others. But when many are connected to one and one to none, we have a world in which shame is less of a moral emotion and more one of ruin. Now, you might say the easiest argument to make against this or in response to this is to say that, well, that's the price of putting yourself online, making yourself so visible. But I might argue it goes further than that. I think that this way of thinking about others kind of is starting to transcend the online space and bleeding into the physical world. Because I think the sheer power of like the anonymous mass of lookers and followers means that those who haven't even chosen to be seen but happen to be seen face very similar consequences to those who have actively put themselves online. The way the internet works creates an almost panopticon view of the world, also with mobile phones, and it essentially just means that any given moment in day-to-day life, there is a chance that literally anyone could become the star of the show. Think about like public filming. Anyone could become the star, whether they've chosen to be seen online or not. One really good example of this is the like astronomer CEO scandal from earlier in the summer. They were ordinary people who just had happened to be seen in a public space in the era of the internet and mobile phones and stuff like that. And they faced a lot of the same consequences as those who actively put themselves out there when they've been seen doing something wrong. I think we've become an almost sort of mass police, making sort of civil arrest to satisfy our own sense of moral superiority, like for our own entertainment even. And I mean, of course, existing in a public space has always had the inevitable consequence of triggering shame and shaming, like I mentioned with my reference to Sartre and the nudity example. But I think existing within a public space in the age of the internet takes this even further. It takes the public space from something like immediate and tangible and just there with physical boundaries to something far beyond that. It makes it so that someone's moral sort of failings or shortcomings can be seen and shamed, not just by those within that immediate proximity as it used to be, but by the entire world. And this kind of exposure does not allow for redemption, especially when done at the scale of doxing and combing the internet for like every morsel of personal information on someone. Like the CEO scandal, someone found his wife's Facebook, everything. Any like little slice of information that can be taken to like ruin the person who's been like defined as a wrongdoer's character even more. It's brutally seeked out and redistributed. It seems like the greatest punishment for those that do wrong, and it is seen by those online, is a forfeiture of their humanity to ridicule by the masses. Namelessness and facelessness becomes a privilege afforded only to those doing the persecuting. And the irony of it all is not only in the use of cruelty to uphold morality, but also given that at any moment, any single person from this like nameless, faceless mass of lookers could be singled out, selected as victim, and undergo the very, very same public exodus that they themselves so keenly participated in. Everyone thinks they're safe until they're not. I say this not with the intention of like defending the moral failings of everyone who has ever committed anything wrong, online or offline. I do believe that those who like commit adultery, just do bad things, should be held accountable. They should face the consequences of their actions. But I also believe that the normalizing of the detrimental levels of surveillance and even doxing that leads to these things being exposed as they are on the internet these days is incredibly concerning. The lack of shame that people feel towards like sitting behind a screen with the explicit intention of hurting someone is a symptom of a world that is hustling further towards sort of not caring for each other's humanity. Like I said, shame paints a picture of ourselves as relational subjects, people who want connection and acceptance, so regulate accordingly. But I think the internet creates an ecosystem of islands. It doesn't allow us to relate to each other in the same way. It is a disproportionate few who are bearing the brunt of shame to a harmful level, and a disproportionate many who go on to troll to their heart's content, never facing the consequences of the cruelty being perceived, therefore never gaining the necessary empathy and character development produced by the experience of shame. I think shame can be a really constructive emotion, but the imbalance of it created by social media is a little bit scary, honestly. We're heading in a direction where entertainment trumps basic empathy and humanity. I think we need to start thinking twice about who and what and why we're persecuting, remembering that shame exists to regulate, not to ruin, and that the court of the online often prescribes life sentences to actions that in real life, like just raising an eyebrow, would have done the job. those are my thoughts. Let me know how you feel about this. Do you feel like the fact that we're online has changed our relationship to shame? Some experience it too much, some not enough. I often think about this because I've been posting online for a little while, and a lot of the times whenever I get a mean DM and I call it out, someone will be like, oh, I didn't realize you would see this. This kind of speaks to what I'm saying. We're removing the humanity from people because we've seen them on a screen. I just think it's a dodgy place to be. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, the usual, like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.